All right, I think we are live.
We are.
At least I am getting messages that we can be seen by other people, so we will go ahead and get started. Salams everyone, and thank you for your patience with getting workshops running and started for the day. So we are super excited to have Dr. Aminah Al Deen with us today. She is a professor emerita of Islamic Studies in the Department of Religious Studies at DePaul University. She's the first and only Black woman to start the first undergraduate baccalaureate program in Islamic World Studies. She's the former editor-in-chief of the Journal of Islamic Law and Culture. Her book publications include African American Islam, Questions of Faith, Transnational Muslims in America, Introduction to Islam in the 21st Century, Global Muslims in the 21st Century, History of Arab Americans, Exploring Diverse Roots in Muslim Ethics in the 21st Century. And Dr. Al Deen is a senior Fulbright scholar and advisory board member of the Institute for Social and Policy Understanding, a board member of the American Islamic College, executive board member of IMAN, which is the Inner City Muslim Action Network, and the American editor for the Muslim Minorities in the West series for Brill Publishers. She's also an editor of Anthropology and Anthology Open Access Journal. So that is just a little bit of a recap for anyone who is not familiar. But Dr. Al Deen, your list goes on, and I think there's a lot of wisdom that comes from having any kind of conversation with someone who has reached your stature in society, whether that is being a published author or being involved in academic studies, which is, I think, something that a lot of Black Muslims aspire to do and be in those spaces. But I think we mentioned in our student panel, like, it's not always just the success stories that we see of, like, here are the publications, here are the journals, here are the whatever it may be in these spaces. So what do you feel like was the moment that you felt like, yes, I'm making something and I'm making it happen, that shifted from the struggles and challenges that you had getting to this point?
Oh, salam alaikum. That's a big, big question. I was talking with some girlfriends of mine, and there's one struggle as a student. There are different struggles when you want to make a difference. I'll put it like that. So which one do you want me to talk about?
Let's talk about making a difference. Like, is that something that you aspired to do from the beginning, or is that something that's just happened along the way?
I think it's something that just happened along the way, mostly because I didn't know how I could make a difference. I was writing a book and finishing my dissertation at the same time and being a little shell-shocked at all of it, trying to figure out how to put all of the things I had learned together for the African American community, which I still work on all the time. And it's a struggle. I had to learn about the world of publishing, the world of journals, and that knowledge is largely inaccessible until you can get your foot in that door. A lot of very fascinating and thorough African American writers don't get their foot in that door, so they wind up self-publishing. And a part of that is that we have not been forthright in please call me and let me see how I can help you. But it's also learning one of the things you learn in graduate school is how to take critique.
For sure. And for these spaces that you have said that you have to get your foot in the door, how did you do that? Like, how did you find those resources and avenues to even get you
my foot in the door, right?
Yeah.
Well, remarkably, Allah manifested that while I was writing my dissertation, the publishers came to me How they knew I existed, I have no clue. But Routledge, an editor from Routledge, literally glued himself to me. And you can write this book, and I will help you do everything you ever needed to do. And on top of that, we will give you some upfront money. And I'm saying, oh my goodness, well, that's nice, but I'm writing this dissertation. And it was, oh, but you can also write this book. So I got a little schizophrenic and began to do two. But once the door is open, others will notice your work, and then you get offers from other publishing companies. The other route is to finish a manuscript and then submit it for review to publishers. It is better to submit it to review from someone who is a mentor of yours first, uh, because you want to put your best foot forward. I think that university publishers and other publishers like Routledge or Oxford and people like that, it is better to have your mentor read whatever it is you think you want to publish first. But I think the key to all of that is academic writing, which is not, I mean, if you want to do academic writing, others want to do biographical and autobiographical writing. That's a different kind of writing, which I don't do. And then there's also fiction. And what you need is a mentor who does fiction, a mentor who does biographical writing.
So I guess the next question is, you've mentioned that people came to you because of your dissertation. So what was that about, that people were reaching out to you to get that published? What was that looking like? Was the topics, themes, anything like that?
Well, I think one of the things in Islamic studies, there's very little philosophical methodology. And to get to that while I was studying, I had to dart out and take courses in philosophy, sociology, anthropology, which added to an enormous course load. But it enabled me to have a way to translate what I wanted to talk about. So publishers, initially Routledge, was very interested that I was using pieces of and extending the philosophy of people like Michel Foucault and Derrida and Bourdieu. I don't know if you know those names, but extending their philosophy in some senses, correcting it in other senses, to see how to look at Muslim communities, particularly in that book, African American Muslim communities.
So we've talked a bit about your world in the publication realm of everything, but before you got there, what was your life looking like? What was your, as we've mentioned, the topic of this workshop is your journey in Islam. What did that look like? Or just like your journey to get to that point as well?
Well, the program I was in was, for me, I'm sure for some others, as difficult. But in the program I was in, we had to master the writing and the reading of 3 languages outside of the language we spoke. We had to do Islamic law, kalam. We had to do Islamic philosophy. We had to do a lot of stuff. So for me, I was always overwhelmed, always losing my mind just a little bit. Quitting every other week, saying, well, I can go into interior design or something that at least I can look at and it looks nice. One of the things I found out and learned to really be grateful for, I had wonderful mentors in undergraduate school, even while I was a science major. And I had an awesome array of mentors in graduate school, from Ishmael Faruqi, to Saeed Hussein Nasser, to Arkoon, Muhammad Arkoon. I mean, just an array, from traditionalists to modernists, from people who were fighting against the stagnation of thought in Islam, to people who thought that traditional Arabic studies was the only way. And then along the way, I met Chinese Muslim scholars and Indonesian Muslim scholars and some West African Muslim scholars. So they broadened my scope. They made my task very, very difficult. So it was, for me, coming from science to Islamic studies, extremely difficult, because humanities in itself was difficult.
Yeah, we have one of the questions in the chat about the topics that you study. And the question is, how do you prioritize the topics you study and write about? Do you write in response to current issues or questions you've always had?
I try to do a range. Fortunately for me, and I try to extend that fortune, I've never had to submit a manuscript and wait for somebody to say okay. So it has been, people ask me to write texts about this, that, and the other. I've used articles more so to address issues. The book I'm working on now talks about Muslim healthcare workers and COVID-19, because part of my background is in medicine. So I was very interested in how Muslim healthcare workers, using Islamic biomedical ethics, were handling COVID-19, its patients, its shortcomings, bad media, absence of PPE, all of those things. So sometimes it's topical, other times it's because I've been asked to write, like the book on Arab Americans. I was asked to write, and that book was a real struggle because I had to learn about Orthodox Christianity. But I use, it's in a tandem.
Absolutely. And with your most recent being about COVID, what are you seeing in terms of the Black Muslim community in response to COVID, either in how it is affecting us or in how doctors are being able to actually inhabit these spaces as of late?
Well, two realms. One, there is a dire shortage of Black African or African American Muslim physicians, nurses, nurse practitioners, physician's assistants. And that kind of shocked me because I thought that people were seeing medicine as something that they could do. On the other hand, there is, I want to say, a quandary. African American Muslims show up, they're African American first, Muslim kind of second. And the patient and the patient's relatives, especially if that patient is female, have difficulties because they got to get stripped bare. And it's who's watching over me? What are there? And there's nobody there to attend to the spiritual questions, which intersect with the psychological questions. So it has been difficult. And African American Muslims are part of the larger African American community and are catching COVID in kind of the same numbers, especially those who don't believe they should wear a mask because Allah will take care of them, or it is Allah's decree. If I catch COVID, I catch COVID. And then they bring it home to elderly parents or other relatives who then die.
Absolutely. And I mean, it's been difficult to see. I think we've witnessed in our own communities the just effects of being Black in these spaces, not only with COVID, but also with things like Black Lives Matter this past summer. And I think a lot of people are trying to find ways to support the communities that we're in. And so, what do you think is our best effort at supporting the communities that are actively on the front lines for us, whether that is in terms of doctors or whether in terms of the people who are protesting right now, to make sure that like Black people in general, but also Black Muslims are prioritized?
Whoa, girl, what did you do? You slept on these questions. Let me think. You know, Black Lives Matter and the protests, I was so happy. I was almost jumping out of my skin. And it took me back to being a freshman and sophomore in college. And one of the things I learned from African Muslims there was that I should take my values and really think through protest. Um, and I made some decisions. You know, I see being Muslim as a struggle along a highway. And on that highway, sometimes you're in the center lane, other times you've drifted over into another lane and you have to auto correct. And, you know, there are all of these things going on at the same time. And when I was in college, there was us, Maulana Karanga's group running around. There were the Black Panthers. There was the Civil Rights Movement. And the only thing I kind of knew was that I thought I knew, was that the civil rights movement was crazy. I mean, why would you beg people to give you what you're supposed to already have? And people are going to sick dogs on you. And your response is, you know, turn the other cheek. I didn't quite get that. So I joined the Black Panthers because that made more sense to me. It made sense to me as a Muslim that justice delayed is no justice at all, and that you have to fight. But I was also fighting to understand my role as a Muslim. You know, there were some things I was willing to talk about. There were other things I was willing to make allies with, and I felt that I couldn't be allied with. So it was always a negotiation. And at the same time, you had fraternities and sororities and people who ignored everything that was happening. This time reminded me so much of that because many of us decided that if I can't live, be free, and, you know, whatever my religious dictates are, then it's no sense in living here at all. I will fight till I die. And I saw that with some of the folks, but I also saw them not learning from my experiences, which is you have to have perimeters. You have to have a check on people who are there not to support you, but are there to cause you harm with the looting and taking advantage of a movement. And I remember reading from, I think her last name is Garcia, who is a co-founder of the Black Lives Matter, that this is supposed to be a movement, not just a protest, not this, because change, real change has to happen. And the civil rights legislation, legislation is nice, but if it's never enforced, it doesn't exist. So I mean, as a Muslim, I did everything I can. I host a talk show on Critical Talk called Critical Talk. Tuesday through Thursday, I try to bring young people what is the theater doing? What should we know in the political? How should we think about education? And as a slightly older person, I see that as something sitting I can continue to do, by getting voices out there.
One of the questions we got was, how has your activism influenced your research?
A lot. When I don't want to write, I write. I learned from Walter Mosley, believe it or not, that you have to write every day. I write every day. I write throughout the day in pieces because I got so used to having kids all over me that I had to learn to write in pieces and keep a thought train in my head. So, but I write every day. I think it's important that we write because if we don't write, we don't exist. And that led me to make the Islam in America archive at DePaul because there has to be a place for us to research from. We have to have resources. And I didn't find African American Muslim institutions where I could begin to create a depository of writings, you know, whether they're biographical, autobiographical pieces, because the generations of Muslims in America amongst the African Americans, there's no they're pieces, you know, and they have to be brought together because we tend to collect stuff and keep it in our basements and our attics where, you know, one good fire, one good flood, one good move, and it's gone. But you have to leave a footprint.
So you mentioned right then at the end, which goes into a great next question that we have of having one good move and then it's gone. I think that relates to young Muslims who are on their journey of figuring out Islam and their relationship to that, whether it is in terms of wanting to do academic studies in the ways that you have or just inhabiting these spaces as well. So what would your advice be for young Muslims who may stumble along the way or may have their one good moment and then start feeling like they're not there anymore and that their faith is shaken?
All of us, I speak of it, I never speak of converts because that's a Christian term that really doesn't apply to an Islamic journey. And I prefer to think of it as a highway that you hop on, you know some things, you don't know others. There's been an Arabic hegemony. So everybody runs off and they try to learn Arabic and learn a lot about dead Arab scholars. But that doesn't seat you if you're African American. So on that highway, and I've talked about this in my classes, you know, if you can picture the lanes on a highway, you start off, you're good. Many of us started off taking the Quran to prayer with us because we hadn't memorized anything. We didn't enter into that genderized field because it was who learned what first, who could lead the prayer, for example. And we moved along. And then sometimes, whether it was a family thing or this, that, and the other, we had people from other cultures telling us, oh, well, if your family is not Muslim, then you got to cut them loose. You know what I'm saying? Have you lost your mind? That is not happening here because I want to inherit something if it's not anything more than a bracelet. No. And then there was a real push to change your name. You know what I'm saying? Oh my God, how are people going to locate you in your family? How are you going to know your nieces and nephews and all of the? You go to college, you have all of these things pulling at you, and you may get out of that center lane on the highway and dip over to the shoulder. You know, your car has run out of gas and you have to go over to the shoulder. And while you're waiting for some assistance, you explore what's on the shoulder. And then you pray. You know, lots of time people talk about holding the rope. And the rope is something that has to be cultivated. It has strands, something that you can hold on to, and people who are welcoming you back. They always have to be there, despite your little exit, to welcome you back, and then take what you have learned and put it in the pot of knowledge. You know, what was it that drove? And you're right. I've seen Islam become a bit of a turnstile, with women saying, "Oh my God, I got brains, I got sense. You're putting me in the back of places. What is up with that? This is not what Islam is supposed to be." And they're right. I've seen young men get so immersed in one portion, one teeny tiny portion of Islamic studies, that they lose the sense. I've seen young people, teaching for 30 years. I think I've seen just about it all. Folk who say, okay, my parents came from, I don't know, name a country, colonial leavings led us to communism or socialism. And now I've decided I want to get back to the religious portion. And there's nowhere to go. I've seen my house was the third space for a while. And I listened, didn't talk, but listened to young people's conversations over sexuality, over marriage, over not having a mentor. It's like, what am I going to do with my life? Everybody doesn't have to be a professor. Everybody doesn't have to be an Islamic scholar. What they do have to do is seat themselves slowly and firmly. Because if you seat yourself quickly, you're going to hop out of the seat. So seat yourself slowly and firmly in Islam.
And it's very obvious that there's some shaking up going on in these communities. Well, there's people questioning certain aspects of Islam that are, making these communities a challenge for young Muslims to create.
Say more about that. What's shaking it up?
Of just having people who are having questions of faith right now, and having whether.
I'm bothering you.
No, you're not bothering me at all. Because right now we're in the middle of a pandemic. We're seeing everything going on in the world, and people are saying, why is this happening? I have, for some people thinking that they've done everything right, and yet we're in the middle of a pandemic, and we're in the middle of, a pull off the highway, an exit that they weren't expecting. So how do we as young Muslims get ourselves back on that highway, and also to continue to foster these communities that are on the ground, that have built us up, that are currently shaken?
Well, when you read the Quran, one of the things that you read with respect to the prophets is prophets coming to people questioning and challenging those prophets. Apparently, there are some people that get the message, and there are others that don't. But everybody experiences a reckoning, and this pandemic is a reckoning. It's out of your control. We have prayed in our dua and other prayers for justice, for a leveling. And then when God on God's terms provides that, we get upset. It's not about your thinking that you've done everything right, because that's your thinking. Only Allahu Alam, only God knows. But it is also what? The pandemic doesn't know race. The pandemic doesn't know class. The pandemic doesn't know religion. So if you wanted to think about it, one would think about, why do we pray for something, and when it comes, we're unable to use the time for reflection? And it is a reflection. Is my Islam superficial? Or has it really come to sit on my heart? Do I use the dhikr to calm myself? You know, how is this shaping me?
So I would say, since we are getting close on time, a great question for young Muslims who are working through their path in Islam is, what is the best piece of advice that you have received or been given that has sculpted the person you are today and the journey that you've been on?
You know, I got that is so darn difficult. I'm thinking that the best advice I got was from Dr. Suleiman Yang. He was on my dissertation committee. I didn't go to Howard, but one of the things he told me is that African Americans have to be African American. Their history is important. You're not Arabs. You don't need to look like Arabs. You need to stop. And he was very adamant about, don't mimic somebody else's culture. Develop your own American, African American Islam. I think that was the best piece of advice I got.
And in terms of your academia, what do you feel has been the shifting moment for you of, this is where the academia is being, like the advice that you were given then that helped you progress yourself into a renowned author and an incredible professor?
I was learning about the various Islamic cultures out there, studying Chinese Islam, studying Indonesian Islam, Southeast Asian Islam, West African and East African Islam, and looking how Islam settled in culture and people made Islam their own, not somebody else's. That kind of shifted me. Yeah.
We have a couple more minutes because we had a networking session cut off. So this is a couple more questions for you if you have the time. There was someone in the comment who asked, can you speak on the impact of Islamophobia or anti-Muslim hatred and discrimination on the right to freedom of thought, consciousness of religion or belief?
Can you repeat the last part of that again?
Yes. So the full question was, can you speak on the impact of Islamophobia or anti-Islam hatred and discrimination on the right to freedom of thought, consciousness of religion or belief?
Well, I think Islamophobia, I think, is an inappropriate term. It's not a hatred of Islam, it's anti-Muslim bigotry. And I think because we have let African American Islam be conflated with immigrant Islam, they're conflated on a lot of terms. The beheadings in Nice will cause anti-Muslim bigotry here. We have not, as a community, done more than say, oh, we condemn. That doesn't mean anything. That's the same as people saying, I condemn racism, and then I go on about being a racist. But, you know, so, I mean, we have to say what it is that should be. The condemnation alone is not alone. I think freedom of speech, we have to realize how this country has permitted some things. You know, freedom of speech and freedom of religion, we're free to practice as Muslims. Trying to force religion into the public space is going to get the same backlash as trying to force Christianity in the public space. We're a minority. So when we want religion in schools, it's not going to be Islam. It's going to be Christianity. You know, when we want the courts to consider Christianity, now we have a majority Catholic Supreme Court. We've not paid attention to federal judges, and their personal religious beliefs are going to drive rulings and other things, which means that people need to go to law school. They need to clerk. And they need to become some of those judges.
So just continuing on that thought that you just left us on, how can young Muslims as minorities combat these institutions and systems that are working against us?
I think we need, I'm going to go back to mentorship, which will help in planning. I have seen attempts at our own institutions. One initiative that I like very much is the Lamppost Educational Initiative, because it prevents a diversity of thought. But I think since we have chosen to be here, we have to see, what do we need both as individuals for that self kind of intellectual satisfaction. We have to pair that with seeking some spiritual satisfaction, both for ourselves as individuals and what will help our communities. During this volume on COVID, we've realized that we are not in the places we want to be. We've left our caretaking to others, which is insane.
So this will be the last question, just because it's a two-part question, might be a little bit tricky. But what do you see as the biggest issue that Black Muslims are facing right now, and how do you think we solve it?
I would think that we haven't developed our own understanding of the Muslim sources out there. We have accepted only Arab sources as our guide, and the Arab world is in chaos. So that, I don't know if that guidance is all that we need to take from. I think one of the base questions, well, one of the happenings is the books on Islam in America are being written by others than African Americans. Self-published books will not be in the libraries going forward. They will not be the online resources going forward for the kids behind, even your kids. When they go, they will find books by others talking about us. And there is a master narrative about us, that fits into a larger Black master narrative. So I think the hegemonies, there's been a Protestantation of Islam. We have surely, even with the term convert, brought Christian sin. We've brought Christianity to sit at the center of Islam without evaluation and reflection. And Islam in America will be an immigrant Islam, which is contentious in and of itself, because these are colonized people. They're not post anything. And I don't know that we want that to be Islam in America.
I definitely agree with you on that. Never letting other people dictate the agendas that we're working on.
Exactly.
Since we have 2 more minutes of time just before we were running into the next workshop, so I would just like to thank you for being here with us today, Dr. Al Deen. I think that anyone here has gained something from your wisdom and your experience, and having that be a formulating point in their own personal journeys to finding new ways of discovering Islam, whether that is on the African American agenda, whether that is on the realm of academics, and in general as well. So thank you so much for your time and for being here with us today.
Well, thank you for having me. And I would just like to say, for those in the audience, get a mentor so you can have a plan. Like yesterday, and almost all of us speaking are willing and up to the task. It's the pandemic. We have time. Thank you so much.
Jazakallah khair. And for everyone else, we'll have like a 5-minute break before our next workshop. And Dr. Al Deen, feel free to join us for the rest of the conference as well.
I will. Salam alaikum.
Alaikum assalam.
Stop broadcast. Okay, close.